Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Jamie, and today I will be continuing part 2 of my coverage on the Meredith Kercher case. Now, if you didn't watch part 1, you won't be terribly lost, but of course, I would highly recommend checking that one out first before starting this video. Now we have a lot of information to go through, so let's dive right in. Our story today takes us back to November 2nd, 2007, in Perugia, Italy. It was All Souls Day, so kind of think of it as Italy's Day of the Dead. It's a day to honor your past loved ones, and many towns will host festivals in celebration of the day as well. At around 11 a.m. that morning, Parisian resident Alyssa Bethelana called the non-emergency line to report that her son had found a cell phone ringing in the garden of their home on Via Sparandio. She had assumed an officer must have dropped it when they'd been at her home just the night before. At around 10 p.m. on November 1st, the Lanas had received an alarming phone call. The anonymous caller yelled into the phone that there was a bomb in their toilet and that they needed to leave the home before it exploded. Obviously freaked out, the Lanas alerted the authorities, and the police came and inspected their home that night. No bomb was found, and it was chalked up to be a bad prank call done in poor taste. But when the postal police arrived the next day to collect the discovered cell phone, it wasn't registered to any officer, but to local Italian law student Filomena Romanali. The postal police left to go return the phone to Filomena. But just about an hour after the first phone had been discovered, Alyssa Betha's daughter discovered a second phone ringing in their garden. Finding this odd, they bring this phone directly to the police. And this one is registered to 21-year-old British exchange student Meredith Kercher, who just so happened to live at the same address as Miss Romanali. But in actuality, both phones had belonged to Meredith. Philomena had given Meredith the spare phone she wasn't using so Meredith could make cheaper local calls. It is believed the phones ended up there by someone walking or driving them up the road and throwing them into the garden, or from someone throwing them off an embankment at Parco San Angelo that overlooked the villa's garden. Parco San Angelo was in close walking distance from both Raffaele and Rudy's apartments. Robin Butterworth arrived at her and Meredith's 10 a.m. class to find that it had been canceled because of the holiday. Robin had lent Meredith a school book the night before, and Robin needed it back today so that she could finish her schoolwork using the same book. So Robin called and texted Meredith to let her know that class was canceled, but to let her know where they could meet up so that she could get her book back. Time passed with no response. Now, it wasn't like Meredith to not answer her phone, so Robin reached out to their other friends to see if any of them had heard from Meredith, and no one had spoken to her since the night before. Amanda and Raffaele say they had a quiet night on November 1st. After Amanda found out she didn't have to work, they say they stayed at Raffaele's and slept in the next morning. But at 5:30 a.m., someone would play music for half an hour on Raffaele's computer. At 6:02 a.m., Raffaele turned his cell phone back on, finally receiving a goodnight text message his dad had sent him the night before at 11:14 p.m. Marco Quaintville, who owned a shop near Raffaele's apartment, would say that he arrived to work that day around 7:45 a.m. when he found a young college student who he would later identify as Amanda standing outside his store waiting for it to open. He said as soon as he unlocked the store, Amanda went directly towards the cleaning section, but he didn't pay enough attention to see if she had purchased anything. Marco would say he found this interaction weird. Considering it was a holiday weekend, he didn't think any college students would be out this early. He said that Amanda looked tired and was wearing jeans, a hat, a gray coat, and a light blue scarf. Similar clothing will later be photographed by crime scene investigators bundled up on Amanda's bed after the discovery of Meredith's murder. At 9:42 a.m., Raffaele spoke on the phone with his dad for 4 minutes. Now, Amanda would say she woke up that day around 10 a.m. and found Raffaele still asleep. She says she woke Raffaele to let him know that she was heading back to her apartment to shower, change, and also to grab a mop to clean up a plumbing leak that had happened in the kitchen the night before. But if Raffaele had just been on the phone with his dad at 9:42 a.m. and was already back asleep by 10 a.m., he must have fallen asleep pretty quickly, if this is to be believed. Amanda would arrive back to her place around 10:30 a.m. and would find the front door wide open. Now, the front door latch was broken and would not stay closed if it wasn't deadbolted. So, Amanda and all of her roommates had become in the habit of always locking the front door, even if they were home. Amanda called out into the apartment to see if any of her roommates were home, but received no answer. She assumed whoever left it open would be back soon. Maybe they went to go take out the trash, or visit the downstairs neighbors, or possibly even to make a quick trip to the store. But there's a couple problems with this. If someone was taking the trash out, the trash cans were outside the driveway gate at Pergola 7. So surely Amanda would have crossed paths with one of her roommates if they were taking out the trash. And all of the downstairs roommates were out of town for the holiday weekend. And if someone was making a quick trip to the store, surely they would lock the faulty front door behind them. Amanda chooses not to lock the faulty front door and continues on into the bathroom to take her shower. While in the bathroom, she notices some blood in the sink and on the faucet. Amanda assumed they were from her recent ear piercings. The piercings were new and prone to bleeding, but when Amanda touched the back of her earrings, she found only dried blood flakes. As Amanda was getting out of the shower, she realized she had forgotten her towel in her room, so she reached to use the bath mat to dry off, but noticed a large, partial bloody footprint. Now, Amanda thought this was gross, but she assumed one of the girls must have just gotten their period or cut themselves while shaving. So she doesn't use the bath mat to dry off, but instead uses it to hop or shuffle her way over to her room in order to avoid getting water on the floor. Amanda says once she got back to her room, she got her towel, dried off, got dressed, but then again chooses to use the bath mat to shuffle or hop her way back to the bathroom to put it back. Now, when I look at this bath mat, it does not look like blood from your period or from cutting yourself. It's clearly a partial footprint. And the only way that you're going to leave a bloody footprint is if the entire bottom of your foot is covered in blood, which typically does not happen from nicking yourself while shaving or from your period. Now, Amanda did live with three other girls, but the only ones that used that specific shower were her and Meredith. So, if the partial bloody footprint wasn't Amanda's, the only other person it could have reasonably belonged to was Meredith. Now, after Amanda puts the bath mat back in her bathroom, she then goes to blow dry her hair in Philomena and Laura's bathroom. While in the bathroom, she looks into the toilet and notices unflushed feces and suddenly starts to feel like something isn't quite right. And the whole time that she had been back to the apartment, no one else had returned. Amanda doesn't flush the toilet but chooses to leave it unflushed. Now, this poop is later DNA tested and it comes back that it was Rudy's. At around 11:30 a.m., Amanda grabs the mop and heads back to Raffaele's, finally locking the front door behind her. When she arrives back to Raffaele, she cleans up the mess in the kitchen, and then over coffee and biscottis, she describes the odd scene in the apartment to Raffaele. He tells her that she should check on her other roommates. At 12:07 p.m., Amanda called Meredith, but the call only lasted 6 seconds, which wasn't even long enough to reach Meredith's voicemail. 1 minute later, at 12:08 p.m., Amanda calls Philomena. At this time, Philomena was at a All Souls Day festival with her friend Paula. Philomena reminded Amanda that Laura was out of town for the holiday weekend, but to try to get a hold of Meredith and head back to the apartment to make sure that everything else was okay. Amanda calls both of Meredith's phones again at 12:11 p.m., but both of these calls are even shorter than her last one. One call only lasted 4 seconds, and the next, only 3. So it doesn't really sound like Amanda's trying all that hard to get a hold of Meredith. And Amanda and Meredith would often just text each other back and forth. So if Amanda is truly worried about Meredith, why isn't she waiting to hear her voicemail? And why isn't she at least sending her a text message to check to see if everything's okay or to give her a call back? Philomena hadn't heard back from Amanda, so she became worried about the state of the apartment. So at 12:12 and 12:20 p.m., Philomena called Amanda back, but both calls went unanswered. Cell tower location would still place Amanda in the vicinity of Raffaele's apartment. So it doesn't appear that Amanda was in any hurry to get back to Bricola 7, especially considering that the walk from Raffaele's back to her place was only about 5 to 8 minutes max. So at some point, Amanda and Raffaele eventually head back to Bricola 7. Amanda says she makes sure to bring the mop back with them. Once they get back to the cottage, they leave the mop by the front door. Now, Amanda would say when they first got to the apartment, they checked on Philomena's room first and Meredith's last, which I don't understand how Amanda's not even concerned enough at this point to check on Meredith's room first. Now, Philomena's room had been trashed, but nothing was taken. Glass from the broken window laid on top of the clothes and various items that were thrown around the room. A large rock weighing over 8 pounds sat on the floor. Amanda and Raffaele see Philomena's computer sitting on her desk and other valuables in plain view, and assume that nothing was stolen. Laura and Amanda's rooms appeared to be undisturbed for the most part. Laura's dresser drawers appeared to have been rifled through, and in Amanda's room they would find what appeared to be blood on her pillow and on the wall behind her bed. The testing on these stains came back inconclusive. Amanda would tell police that her room was messy but normal messy, and that she didn't notice anything out of place or missing. But there was something missing from Amanda's room: her table lamp, the only source of light in Amanda's entire bedroom. In most bedrooms, you have like a light switch you can turn on and you have an overhead light. Amanda's room was the only room in the apartment that didn't have a working overhead light. So the small black table lamp was the only source of light for her entire room. So, unless Amanda was in the habit of getting dressed in the dark, I find this odd that she didn't notice this when she came back to the apartment the first time to shower and change her clothes. At 12:34 p.m., Philomena calls Amanda back for the third time. And this time, Amanda finally answers and tells Philomena that she's at the apartment and her room was broken into, and that Meredith's door was locked and she wasn't answering. Philomena tells Amanda to call the police. Philomena hangs up and tries to get a hold of her boyfriend Marco to go head over to the apartment to check on things, while her and Paula make it back there to Parola 7. But Marco wasn't answering his phone, so Paula calls her boyfriend Luca, who does answer. Luca goes and picks up Marco, and they head to the apartment. The parking garage CCTV footage would show that at 12:35 p.m., two postal police officers arrived to return Meredith's cell phones that had been found earlier that morning in the garden of a home not far away. Now, Raffaele's defense was able to prove in court that the CCTV footage from the parking garage was about 10 to 12 minutes slow. So, realistically, the postal police had walked up to the cottage probably around 12:45 to 12:47 p.m. When the police arrive, they find Amanda and Raffaele standing outside the cottage, and they seem startled by their arrival. The couple tell the plainclothes police that they were waiting for the carabinieri to arrive because they had just called in about a break-in. At 12:40 p.m., Raffaele speaks on the phone with his dad for 67 seconds. At 12:47 p.m., Amanda calls her mom in Seattle for 88 seconds, meaning it was 4:47 a.m. in Seattle. Amanda's mom, Etta, would say it was odd for Amanda to call her at such an hour. Amanda told her mom that something weird was going on at the apartment. Etta told her to call the police. At 12:50 p.m., Raffaele spoke on the phone with his sister for 39 seconds, who at the time was a lieutenant in the Carabinieri, Italy's military police. At 12:51 and 12:54 p.m., Raffaele finally calls the Carabinieri.
Vinieri?
Pronto, buongiorno. Senta, qualcuno è praticamente entrato in casa sfondando la finestra e ha messo molto disordine, c'è una porta chiusa. La via è...
Io della Pergola.
Perugia Carabinieri? Della Pergola 7.
Via?
Della Pergola 7 a Perugia.
Via della Pergola 7, si fa abitazione, signor?
Allora, guardi, Amanda... Diciamo, chi abita dentro? Sono un gruppo di studenti a cui Amanda...
Mi dia il nome e il cellulare di uno degli affittuari.
Ok, Amanda?
Sì.
Il cognome KN?
Sì.
O X?
Sì.
Il numero di cellulare...
Mi faccio finire parlare, dopo le dici. Sto dicendo.
Pronto?
Sì, sono qui, del numero appunto.
Della prefettura di Perugia, che gli incidenti stradali con spostamenti li fanno i video urbani.
348
Allora, se voi c'è la possibilità di
Sì.
fare un
46
Sì.
73
Sì.
590.
590? Furto in abitazione, eh?
No, non c'è furto, hanno rotto il vetro, si è praticamente un po' di soldi e c'è pure una porta chiusa che non sono pure.
Un attimo, eh? Pronto? Allora, guardi, cioè praticamente sono entrati, hanno rotto un vetro e come sa che sono entrati?
Chiaro, si vede dai segni, poi sono pure macchie di sangue nel bagno.
Cioè sono entrati e perché sono rotti, cioè si sono tagliati rompendo il vetro? Pronto? Carabinieri Perugia?
Sì, salve, ho chiamato 2 secondi fa praticamente.
Qualcuno è entrato in casa, ha rotto il vetro?
Sì.
No? Poi è andato al bagno.
Hai chiamato?
Ma non lo so,
Ok, grazie.
se venite qui magari...
Cosa hanno portato?
No, non hanno portato via niente, il problema è che c'è una porta chiusa, ci sono macchie di sangue.
No.
C'è una porta chiusa, qual è la porta chiusa?
Sì, una delle conquiline che non c'è, non sappiamo dove...
No, è del sacerdotto. Grazie, guarda.
E ci sono fuori dalla porta di questa conquilina che non c'è delle macchie di sangue?
Nel bagno ci sono delle macchie di sangue.
Ah, nel bagno. E questa porta è chiusa? Questa ragazza avete un cellulare?
Sì, l'abbiamo cercato di chiamarla ma non risponde da nessuna parte.
Va bene, adesso mando una pattuglia così verifichiamo la situazione.
Ok.
Va bene?
Va bene.
Arrivederci.
There's a couple of things that stood out to me in Raffaele's 112 calls. During his first call, he hangs up the phone right after being asked if the blood in the bathroom was from the burglar cutting themselves on the window. It's almost like Raffaele knew that the blood in the bathroom wasn't from the burglar, and in fact, no one had cut themselves on the window in Philomena's room. During his second call, when asked if anything had been stolen, he confidently answered no. But if the room was trashed, how could he possibly know nothing had been taken? Amanda and Raffaele both justify that they knew nothing had been stolen because they saw valuables out in plain view. At trial, it would be a point of contention between defense and prosecution whether Raffaele made his 112 calls before or after the postal police arrived. Postal police didn't document their exact arrival time, so they kind of just went off the parking garage CCTV footage. The parking garage CCTV footage would show Postal Police's car pulling up near the home at 12:35 p.m. But the clock was about 10 to 12 minutes slow, meaning it was probably about 12:47, 4 minutes before Raffaele's first call to the police. But since prosecution could not establish an exact arrival time of the postal police, the court would ultimately rule in the defense's favor on this. The Massey court that ended in Raffaele and Amanda's conviction believed that they did most likely call the Carabinieri before the postal police had arrived. But even if Raffaele did just so happen to call the police literally minutes before the postal police arrived, Philomena had first told Amanda to call the police at 12:34 p.m., 17 minutes before they actually did so. Now, once the postal police get there, Amanda and Raffaele go on to show the officers the blood in the bathroom and the break-in. Responding officer Bassatelli took one look at the room and said, "I don't think this is a robbery. It looks more like a put-up job to me." Officers noticed visible bloody shoe prints throughout the apartment. Philomena, Marco, Paola, and Luca all arrived not long after the postal police did. When discussing Meredith's door being locked, Amanda would say that Meredith often locked her door. Philomena would immediately disagree and say that the only time Meredith had ever locked her door was when she had returned back home to England one weekend. When asked about this at trial, Amanda would say that Meredith sometimes locked her door if she was changing after taking a shower. Now, given the state Amanda found the bathroom in, if Meredith locked her door after taking a shower, considering the blood you found on the bath mat, wouldn't she be more concerned thinking that she hurt herself? Given the state Amanda found the apartment in, the front door open, visible bloody shoe prints leading from Meredith's room out the front door, blood in the bathroom, a bloody footprint on the bath mat, Philomena's room being ransacked but nothing taken, Meredith not answering the door, even when people were knocking and calling her name, and the postal police had just come by to return both of Meredith's cell phones, which had been found in someone's garden earlier that morning. Meredith always had her phones on her. This was not a normal circumstance for Meredith's door to be locked or to remain locked. And the only person who doesn't seem concerned by these multiple red flags is Amanda. Philomena pleads with the postal police to kick down Meredith's door. Something was seriously wrong. The police tell her that they can't break down the door without cause. At around 1:15 p.m., Philomena tells Marco and Luca to kick in the door. She will take responsibility for the damage done. Philomena, Paola, and the police all stand in the hallway close by, watching while the door is kicked in. Amanda and Raffaele stay in the kitchen. Luca notices a small crack in Meredith's door before they kick it in. Raffaele would tell investigators when they first noticed Meredith's door locked, he had tried to kick it in himself, cracking the door but not successfully opening it. Raffaele's fingerprint would also be found on Meredith's door as well. It takes Luca a few tries, but once the door is finally forced open, Luca shouts, "There's blood everywhere," and they see a horrific scene. Meredith's bare foot is sticking out from a comforter on the floor. The top of her head is poking out from the top of the comforter, surrounded by a bloody mess. A brown purse of hers, a different one than the one she had been carrying the night before, sat open on the stripped bed. Two crumpled up receipts were discarded on top of the comforter that had been used to cover Meredith. The police immediately ordered everyone to get out of the house. The cottage was sealed off as a crime scene. After being ordered out of the cottage, Philomena, Marco, Paola, and Luca all stood pretty close to the front door. Philomena was in shock. Paola was crying uncontrollably. Luca was shaking, and Marco said he felt like he was about to vomit as they were exiting the house. Amanda and Raffaele separated themselves from the group and walked further down the driveway. The two appeared dazed and clung to each other in an affectionate way. When I look at the pictures of them in the driveway, Amanda does look like she's in a daze. News media arrived pretty quickly. Video footage of the two would be captured hugging and kissing just shortly after Meredith's body is discovered. In order to collect everyone's statements, the police ask everyone to go to the local station. Amanda and Raffaele would catch a ride there with Luca. Before taking off, Raffaele would get out of the car to tell the police when Amanda had first gotten to the apartment that day, she had noticed feces in the large bathroom, but when she checked it again, they were flushed. Investigators went into the bathroom to check and saw that the poop hadn't been flushed. They started to get the feeling that Amanda and Raffaele really wanted them to take note of the shit in the toilet. Luca would later recount that he felt that they were acting rude too. On the way to the station, Raffaele had asked him if Meredith was dead, which Luca said yes. He then asked Luca how she died. Luca told him he heard the police say that her throat had been cut. Raffaele then asked, with a knife? Luca said yes. The conversation ended. Luca would say he felt Raffaele's tone was cold and unemotional given the topic of conversation. Amanda made a gulping noise that almost sounded like crying. Days after, Luca would still feel so unsettled about the interaction that he felt the need to go check the backseat of his car to make sure that they didn't leave anything incriminating behind. Thankfully, he didn't find anything. Back home in Goldston, Meredith's family was trying to get a hold of her. Meredith always had both of her cell phones on her and was in constant communication with her family, especially her mom, Arlene. So it wasn't normal for Meredith to be radio silent this long. At first, they just kind of told themselves that she probably went out the night before and was still sleeping it off. But then they heard news of a British exchange student being found murdered in Perugia. At 4:39 p.m., Meredith's older sister Stephanie texted her, "Hey Mez, Mom just called and said there's been a girl on the news who's just been found in Perugia with her throat slit. Are you okay? And be very careful. Don't go out at night on your own, Mez, and please look out for yourself. Give Mom a call if you can as well. Lots of love. XXX." Meredith's dad, John, who was a journalist, called around to some of his news connections to see if the name of the murdered student had been released. John and his 3 other adult children met up at Arlene's house while they waited to hear back. John would receive a phone call, and the lady on the other line timidly said, "The name going around Perugia is Meredith." The Kerchers held themselves in the living room and cried as they watched the news segment announcing Meredith Kercher as the exchange student found murdered in her bedroom in Perugia, Italy, earlier that day. Now, while at the station, Rafa and Amanda again separated themselves from the group. They wrote notes back and forth to each other in a notebook that Amanda had brought. They would continue to show public displays of affection. Amanda sat on his lap, they made faces at each other, and told jokes. An officer actually had to tell them that their behavior was inappropriate and they needed to stop. In her memoir, Amanda would describe this as Raffaele trying to baby her to soothe her agitation, and that's how she was able to stay calm this entire time. In Raffaele's memoir, he says that Amanda was the one who curled up on him like a koala bear and began kissing him and stuck her tongue out at him as a joke. That's when the officer told them to cut it out. Raffaele said Amanda's behavior at the police station embarrassed him, and he understood why Meredith's friends were put off by it. Even Raffaele describes her behavior after Meredith's murder as bizarre. Officer Fabio De Estolo assisted Amanda at the station, and he would say that everyone else was crying, but Amanda stayed calm. He assisted with having her fingerprints taken, and that's around the time that Amanda began pacing up and down the hallway and hitting herself on the head. At trial, Amanda doesn't deny doing this, and when asked why she did this, she would say it was because she was just shocked by the whole situation. Officer Pravazio would witness Amanda doing splits, handstands, and a cartwheel at the station as well. Now, while you can't determine someone's guilt or innocence based off of their reactions to situations the majority of us will never have to endure, you can't discount behavior entirely. Amanda's yoga, splits, and handstands have often been compared to that of Jodi Arias, who, while being interrogated for the brutal stabbing of her ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander, started doing handstands, yoga, and singing songs to herself while at the police station. When Meredith's friends arrived at the police station, Natalie Hayward said that she hoped Meredith didn't suffer, to which Amanda responded, "How could she not? She got her fucking throat slit," which really disturbed and shocked all of Meredith's friends. During her trial, when Amanda was asked why she said this, her answer was, "I heard that her throat was cut, and from what I saw on CSI of these things are neither quick nor pleasant. So when they said, 'We hope she died quickly,' like, I don't know, in some other way, I said, 'But what are you saying? Her throat was cut. Good Lord, blurg.' I'd remained at that point that the brutality, this death was really black. That made a horrible impression, and that's what really struck me. The fact of having your throat cut, it seems so gross, and I imagine it was a very slow and terrifying death. So when they said, "We hope it was like this," I said no. I think it was really gross. Disgusting. Meredith's other friends, Robin and Natalie, would say that Amanda was completely calm and unbothered and told them that she came home to find the front door wide open, blood in the bathroom, and Meredith's body was sticking out of a closet with a blanket covering her. But when Meredith's door was kicked in, Amanda was in the kitchen with Raffaele and not able to see into the room. In other statements, Amanda would confirm that she never saw into Meredith's room when it was kicked in. She had just been relaying what she had heard from others. Amanda and everyone else is kept at the police station until the late hours of November 2nd. While at the station, Amanda would write an eyebrow raising note. "So I'm at the police station after a long day of recounting how I was the first person to come home to find my roommate dead. What's strange is all I want to do right now is write a song about it. It would be the first song I ever wrote, and it would be about someone who died horribly and for no reason. How morbid is that? I'm starving. I keep wanting to say I could kill for a pizza, but it just doesn't seem right. Laura and Philomena are pretty fucked up. Raffaele, too. I'm mad. First I was scared, then I was sad, then I was confused, then I was pissed, and now, I don't know. I can't really wrap my mind around it. I didn't see her body, and I didn't see her blood. So it was almost like it didn't happen. But it did, in the bedroom right next to mine. The blood was in the bathroom I used to shower today. The door to my house was open for the wind, and now I am homeless, without forever one person who was a part of my life, and I don't know what to do or think." Now, there is no textbook on how to grieve. Everyone is different. But this is barely less than 24 hours after Meredith is murdered. And Amanda's biggest concerns seem to be about wanting a pizza and how she doesn't have an apartment to go back to. Once Laura had heard of what had happened to Meredith, she took the first train back to Perugia and immediately went to the police station. It was filled with everyone who had been close to Meredith during her short time in Italy. And pretty much everyone was sad and some even hysterical. But Laura noticed that Amanda seemed to be pretty put together. Laura would notice a scratch on Amanda's neck that she didn't remember being there when she had last saw Amanda just 2 days prior on October 30th. Laura didn't mention the scratch to anyone, thinking it was obvious to anyone that looked at Amanda. At trial, Laura would tearfully recount how she had been reprimanded multiple times by police and prosecution for not mentioning the scratch on Amanda's neck sooner in the investigation. The scratch would be photographed by investigators 5 days after the murder, on November 6th, after Amanda's arrest. Amanda maintains that it wasn't a scratch, but a hickey. While in the waiting room, Philomena and Laura would say that Amanda began asking them about prospects of the three of them finding a new apartment together. Philomena and Laura both told Amanda this wasn't the time or place for such a conversation. It feels as if Amanda had very little concern for what had just happened to Meredith. Giacomo, who was back home for the holiday weekend, took a train back home to Perugia and headed immediately for the police station when he heard of Meredith's murder. Like everyone, he felt Amanda was too calm. He would later say that Amanda's eyes didn't show any sadness, and he began to wonder if she was involved. Back at Bergola 7, investigators began processing the crime scene. If Amanda and Raffaele had actually called the Carabinieri when Philomena first told them to do so, this case probably would have gone completely different. But because postal police arrived first and called in about the potential crime scene at the cottage, their forensic squad, the RIS, would arrive first and begin documenting the scene before the Carabinieri's forensic team, the ERT, even arrived. While the postal police's forensic squad is highly skilled, they typically do not handle crime scenes as violent as this. That's typically left to the Carabinieri's forensic team. Lead forensic specialist Patrizia Stefanoni and her team would spend 11 hours documenting the scene before allowing Meredith's body to be removed by the coroner. Even though they spent such a long time processing the scene, oversights and mistakes would still be made. But I don't think any of them were malicious or intentional. The Postal Police's forensic unit just didn't typically deal with crimes as violent as this. 9 visible bloody shoe prints, specifically Rudy Guede's size 11 Nike Outbreak 2 shoe prints, were found in the hallway, the living room, and the kitchen. They were all in the direction of someone walking immediately out of Meredith's room to the front door. 7 other shoe prints matching these would be found in Meredith's room. These prints were readily visible to the naked eye, but once investigators applied luminol to the hallway between Meredith's room, Amanda's room, and their bathroom, they would find even more prints. There was one shoe print that was too vague to match, but it was DNA tested. It contained a mixture of both Amanda and Meredith's DNA. They also found 3 bloody footprints outside Meredith's door. One too vague to match, one consistent with Amanda's foot, and the other consistent with Raffaele's. But forensics made an oversight and didn't test these 3 luminol footprints for DNA. In Philomena's room, the break-in room, they would find 2 luminol traces from what appeared to be drops of blood that had been wiped up. Thankfully, these ones were DNA tested, and one came back as a match for Meredith's DNA, and the other came back as a match for both Meredith and Amanda's. It contained mostly Meredith's DNA, with a small amount of Amanda's mixed in. In Amanda's room, there appeared to be blood on her pillow and on the wall below the shelf above her bed. However, testing on these spots were inconclusive. On Amanda's closet door, they would find Meredith's fingerprints, indicating Meredith had recently been in Amanda's room and touched her closet doors. In Amanda's room, luminol would reveal 3 footprints, all 3 consistent with Amanda's footprint and DNA. One print was near the entrance to her room, and this would be photographed. 2 others would be found near the radiator under the window, but by another oversight by the forensic police, these would not be photographed either. Laura Mazzetti's room was mostly undisturbed, and when luminol was applied, nothing was found. In Philomena and Laura's bathroom, feces were left in the toilet. DNA later confirmed it was Rudy's. His DNA would also be found on the roll of toilet paper. When the bathroom was sprayed with luminol, no traces were found, indicating that Rudy had used the bathroom and left without flushing prior to the murder. The washing machine was also kept in Philomena and Laura's bathroom. Inside the washing machine, there was a load of laundry containing Amanda's clothes, Meredith's clothes, and some towels. Investigators say that the items were wet and still warm, indicating that it had been recently washed. Amanda and Raffaele both state that the last time they saw Meredith was the day before, and Meredith had started a load of laundry before leaving the house at 4:30 p.m. But if this was the same load of laundry Meredith washed over 24 hours prior, it wouldn't still be warm. And why would Meredith be washing her clothes, Amanda's clothes, and towels all in the same load? Meredith and Amanda shared the smaller bathroom that was directly across the hall from their room. Visible traces of blood were found in multiple areas of the room: on the door, the light switch, sink, bidet, and the bath mat. When DNA tested, the traces on the bidet drain plate, the sink, and the plastic container of cotton swabs came back as containing both Amanda and Meredith's DNA, indicating that both were bleeding at the same time. Blood on the faucet came back as containing only Amanda's DNA. Many believe this was from her recently pierced ears. Shortly after arriving in Italy, Amanda would get multiple piercings in her ears all at once. Her roommate Laura had similar piercings, and Amanda followed suit. Amanda said some of the piercings were infected and prone to bleeding. When she first noticed the blood in the sink, she had assumed it was from her recent piercings, but when she touched the back of her ears, she only noticed dried blood flakes. Some who believe that Amanda was somehow involved in what happened to Meredith speculate that if Amanda and Meredith had gotten into a fight the night before, maybe one of Amanda's earrings had gotten ripped out in the struggle, and maybe that's why her piercings were bleeding. The bloody footprint on the bath mat was a partial print. It was missing the heel, and there wasn't any corresponding bloody heel print on the floor, meaning it had been wiped up. Amanda has said and written that after taking a shower in the smaller bathroom, she had forgotten her towel, and in order to avoid getting water all over the floor, she used the bath mat to shuffle her way over to her room to get her towel, and then once again shuffled her way to put the bath mat back. So I guess that could account for why there's no corresponding heel print. The bloody footprint on the bath mat was a partial print. It was missing the heel, but when it was analyzed, the partial print was a match in size and characteristics to Raffaele's right foot. There was a luminol revealed footprint in the hallway outside Meredith's room, Amanda's room, and their bathroom. The print was consistent with coming from Raffaele's right foot. At trial, the defense really couldn't counter Raffaele's print being in the hallway, but they tried their best to discount the one on the bath mat, saying it was a partial print and it had most likely come from Rudy, since Raffaele and Rudy's feet were the same width. But all of the other prints left behind by Rudy were shoe prints. His shoe prints show that he walked directly out of Meredith's room and out the front door. It appears as if Rudy had his shoes on the entire time, and if he had them on the entire time, he wouldn't get blood on the bottom of his foot. No traces of Rudy's DNA, fingerprints, or shoe prints would be found in the smaller bathroom. Investigators began to feel like someone had tried to do a selective cleanup of the crime scene. The bloody shoe prints belonging to Rudy were left readily visible, but the footprints in the hallway belonging to Amanda and Raffaele were only seen under luminol. The bloody footprint on the bath mat was a partial print, and the corresponding heel print wasn't on the floor, indicating it had been wiped up. And some of the blood in the bathroom, like the blood on the light switch and door, appear to be remnants left behind from what had originally been a larger mess. A load of laundry that appeared to have been recently ran contained Amanda's clothes, Meredith's clothes, and towels. And to top it all off, when the postal police arrived to return Meredith's found cell phones, Raffaele and Amanda were standing outside the cottage with a mop and bucket near the front door. Now, Amanda claims that they had the mop out because of a plumbing leak that had happened at Raffaele's apartment the night before. When Raffaele is later asked by police about the plumbing leak, he at first didn't know what they were talking about. A day after his arrest, he would write a letter saying he had initially forgotten about the leak, but the police's questions about it jogged his memory. He had found the leak suspicious because it wasn't possible for the plumbing under the sink to detach itself, but somehow it did, and it flooded half the apartment. I believe this is just the first excuse that Amanda could think of to explain why she, the roommate who did the least amount of chores, so much so that they had to establish cleaning shifts to make sure that she was doing her fair share, would be found outside her home with a mop and bucket the day that her roommate is found brutally murdered. Raphael and Amanda can't go back on this plumbing leak story now because that would be as good enough as an admission of guilt. So they're stuck clinging to this ridiculous story about a plumbing leak that they let sit out overnight just to be able to use the mop from Amanda's apartment to clean it up the next day. Immediately at the entry to Meredith's room, at the foot of the bed was a black cord sticking out. It was Amanda's missing table lamp, the only working source of light in Amanda's room. Meredith's table lamp was on the floor between her nightstand and the head of the bed. Blood smears under the bed indicated someone had been looking for something under there after the murder, most likely using the two lamps to get a better look. All of the bedding except the mattress cover had been stripped. There were bloody outlines on the mattress cover that appeared to have come from a bloody knife or knives being placed there. On the bed sat a brown purse with a sock on the handle. This was not the purse Meredith had been carrying the night before. She had been carrying the white purse that was found on the floor. On the brown purse, there was a long blonde hair. There was a bloodstain near the zipper that came back as containing DNA that belonged to both Meredith and Rudy. A short black hair was found on the bed near the purse. On the bed also sat a book, a notebook, the other sock, and a towel with a few spots of blood on it. Meredith was found laying on the floor to the right of the bed. Her brown comforter covered her body except for a foot and the top of her head. 2 crumpled up receipts had been discarded on top of the comforter. Underneath Meredith was the rest of her bedding. Her sheet was bundled up and partially underneath her. On the sheet was another long blonde hair, a red chestnut hair, an animal hair, and a very short black hair. Now, none of these hairs had an intact root, so no DNA analysis could be conducted. Her pillow was under her lower back, and on the pillow there was a bloody handprint that would later come back as belonging to Rudy. There were also 2 bloody shoe prints on the pillow as well, one consistent with Rudy, and the other consistent with a female size 7 Nike shoe. On the pillow there was also a stain, possibly semen. Forensics chose not to test the stain, believing it appeared to be older. They knew Meredith was in a relationship with Giacomo, and it could have reasonably belonged to him. Investigators feared testing the stain would compromise the other vital evidence found on that pillow. This is a decision I just don't understand. Even if the DNA had come back as Giacomo's, he had a rock-solid alibi at the time of the murder. And it's also completely reasonable to believe that that could have ended up there from a different time. Giacomo had just been in Meredith's room 3 days prior. However, defense was given the option to test the stain if they would like, and they would ultimately decline. In Raffaele's book Honorbound, he would say that the reason he chose not to test the semen stain was because he feared the police would manipulate the evidence to show that the stain had belonged to him. From a defense standpoint, I completely understand why they chose not to test this stain. It's a lose-lose situation either way. If the stain comes back as belonging to Raffaele, well, that's the nail in the coffin right there. But even if the stain comes back as belonging to someone else, that doesn't exonerate him either, because prosecution believed this was a group murder. So it's reasonable to believe that other people's DNA would be there as well. All of Meredith's clothes have been removed except for 2 shirts that were pulled up over her chest. Bloodstains on the shirt indicated that they had been pulled up after Meredith was stabbed. The clothes she had been wearing that night were laying on the floor near her. Her bra had been cut off of her completely, severing the clasp from the rest of the bra. The main part of the bra had Meredith and Rudy's DNA on it. Investigators believe that Meredith's bra and some of her other clothes had been removed sometime after the murder. Blood spatter was on the bra that was not on Meredith's chest, and an outline of blood of where her bra would have been was on Meredith's chest, both indicating that she had been wearing the bra when she started bleeding. Blood soaked the right strap of the bra. A blue jacket Meredith had been wearing that night was near her as well. Blood soaked the right collar and sleeve. The sleeves were pulled inside out and had Rudy's DNA on the left sleeve. Since blood soaked the right side of both the bra and the jacket, Meredith was most likely wearing these as she bled out on her right side, and they would have been removed sometime after. The button and fly on her jeans showed no sign that they had been forcibly taken off of her. The jeans were inside out with a couple drops of blood on the inside. Her panties were inside out and on the floor and had no blood on them. The shelf of toiletries near her closet appeared to have been bumped into or hit during the attack, as some of the items had been knocked over. The majority of the blood spatter was on the closet doors and would suggest Meredith's neck was only about 16 inches off the floor when she was stabbed, meaning she had been held down during the attack. Blood on the wall above where Meredith's body was found was in the shape of fingertips, maybe from Meredith or one of her attackers grabbing onto the wall to steady themselves after the stabbing. Blood smears on the floor indicated Meredith was moved from the spot in front of the closet, where it's believed she was stabbed, to the area in front of the nightstand where she would be discovered. Investigators were sure to photograph the discovery of the bra clasp during the first day. The clasp had been completely severed from the bra and was found under the pillow that was underneath Meredith. When it came time to collect the evidence, That was done by a different set of police officials. The previous team only put one marker for the bra and the severed clasp. The bra would get collected, but by an oversight, the clasp would be forgotten. It would sit in the sealed-off apartment behind a closed door, only accessed for investigation purposes, until it was rediscovered and collected 46 days later. It would be found across the room from its original location. When finally found and tested, it had both Raffaele's and Meredith's DNA. Raffaele's DNA was found on the hooks, and it wasn't in a small amount. His DNA was confirmed through testing done at two separate laboratories, once during the primary investigation and then a second time during the appeal. Defense would argue and during the appeal be successful in stating that Raffaele's DNA on the bra clasp couldn't be reliable, because it could have ended up there from contamination due to the delay in collection. But Raffaele's DNA was confirmed on the clasp through testing done at two different laboratories. Raffaele also states he had never entered Meredith's room before. So how is it possible his DNA could have ended up there in such a large amount from accidentally being kicked across the floor of a room he had never entered? But the bra clasp hadn't been the only piece of evidence that hadn't been collected in a timely manner. The pillow that had been under Meredith's lower back was also rediscovered the same day as the clasp. While the clasp appeared to have been kicked across the floor, the pillow had been shoved into Meredith's closet. The pillow had Rudy's bloody handprint, shoe print, a woman's size 7 Nike shoe print, and that possible semen stain. While the bra clasp appeared to have just been kicked across the floor, the pillow had intentionally been put into the closet. While police were at Pergola 7 collecting the bra clasp and the pillow, they received a call from one of Raffaele's attorneys, Luca Maiori. He wanted the police to come meet him outside of a gas station down the road, where he had found a kitchen knife and bloody tissues, believing that they might be connected to the murder. And I won't spend a lot of time on this because honestly I believe it's ridiculous. The bloody tissues seem recent and not like they could have been from a murder that had occurred a month and a half ago, especially if these tissues had been sitting outside the entire time. Now, back on November 2nd, the day the murder is discovered, police would find some bloody discarded tissues on the road near Pergola 7, but when those bloody tissues were tested, the DNA evidence came back as unknown and not a match for anyone believed to have been related in this crime. They would also find a few blood drops outside the lower apartment as well, but all of those blood drops came back as animal blood. Now, Meredith's autopsy report. It was very upsetting and hard to read. Meredith's injuries were brutal and numerous. However, in order to get a full understanding of this case, I feel it's necessary to go over how extensive her wounds were. My biggest issue with this case is that a lot of people who cover it give a selective presentation of the facts, or sometimes just flat out misinformation. My goal in the end is that you have a full understanding of what happened in this case. I will do my best to avoid being overly graphic, but at times it's almost unavoidable here. Meredith's autopsy was performed on November 4th, 2007. The coroner, Dr. Luca Lally, placed her time of death between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. the night of November 1st, and she hadn't died a quick death. She had been fatally stabbed in the neck twice, and blood would be found in her lungs. She had no drugs or alcohol in her system. There were 62 different wounds noted. 38 of those were inflicted upon her head and neck. There were hemorrhages to the top and back of her head, along with bruising. Meredith had been violently hit on the head. The most fatal injuries were two knife wounds on either side of her neck. The left, a wider gaping knife wound. The orientation suggested it had been inflicted by a upwards thrust of a sharp object, going diagonally from left to right. The right fatal neck wound was more narrow and not as deep. It appeared a smaller knife had been plunged directly into her neck. Due to the difference in size and orientation, the coroner concluded that the two wounds had been inflicted by two different knives. 6 other knife wounds were found on her neck and cheeks, but those were considered minor and indicated that she was threatened with the knife by minor cuts before receiving the fatal blows. She had 4 minor scratches on her hands. Meredith had at least 39 bruises. 21 were on her neck and face, and at least 12 other bruises on the rest of her body. The bruising found on her neck, face, and thighs were in the shape of fingertips. During the primary trial in 2009, Dr. Lawley and 2 other expert witnesses would concur that some of the finger-shaped bruises were too small to have come from Rudy or Raffaele, and were more consistent with coming from a female. During the trial, the judge and jury would be shown a video comparing Amanda's hand to some of the finger-shaped bruises on Meredith. They were consistent. The finger-shaped bruising on Meredith's face indicated that her mouth and nose were covered during the attack, and her jaw was held shut, most likely to keep her from screaming. Her mouth had been held shut with such force that there was bruising to the inside of her mouth and gums, and she had forcibly bitten down on her own tongue. The bruising on her neck indicated that she had been strangled as well, most likely before receiving the fatal stab wounds. Her hyoid bone, which is a U-shaped bone that sits at the base of the tongue, was broken, which could have resulted either from being strangled or from being stabbed. The front of both of her hips, specifically on the iliac crests, were bruised, indicating that she had been pushed down on her stomach. There were matching bruises on the inside of both of her elbows, consistent with her arms being held behind her. The finger-shaped bruising on her thighs indicated that her legs were held down and open during the attack. No semen would be found, but DNA would be found on Meredith's vaginal swabs, and that came back as a match for Rudy. Bruising, the coroner believed to be from a lack of lubrication, also suggested Meredith had been sexually assaulted before her death. Now, typically in lone assailant knife attacks, the victims will put their arms up to defend themselves and even try to grab at the knife. Victims of similar attacks will often have a lot of defensive wounds on their arms, hands, and some even have their fingers almost severed or completely severed just from the natural response to grab at the knife blade coming at you. But other than some small bruises and 2 minor cuts on her hands, she had no other defense wounds. They wouldn't even find DNA underneath her fingernails. So if she had scratched her attacker, there was no evidence of it. Meredith's injuries didn't tell a story of her fighting against a lone knife-wielding attacker, but instead told a story of being so viciously restrained that she was left with multiple finger-shaped bruises throughout her body. This led investigators to believe that Meredith had been restrained by more than one person. She wouldn't have just laid there and not fought back. She was sober at the time of the attack and was most likely up doing homework, so she would have been alert. Blood spatter on the closet door suggested that she had been held down close to the floor when she was stabbed, estimating her neck was only about 16 inches away from the ground. During the 2009 trial, Dr. Lawley would say that he couldn't with absolute 100% certainty say that Meredith's injuries couldn't have been committed by a lone attacker, but he said her injuries fit better with being inflicted by more than one person. And if the attack had included a sexual assault, then she had to have been outnumbered. After the autopsy was completed, Meredith's parents, John and Arlene, and her older sister Stephanie, were able to come and formally identify the body. John chose not to view Meredith, not wanting to taint the last memory of his youngest child. He had seen her just the month before when she had returned back home to England to purchase more clothes for the upcoming winter. The two had made plans to meet for coffee, but per usual, Meredith was running late. But when she finally arrived, she happily pulled out a pair of boots that she had just purchased and showed it to her dad. At the corners, Arlene and Stephanie went back to go see Meredith. The sheet had been pulled up right underneath her chin, and her eyes were closed. Arlene leaned down and kissed her youngest daughter, only 21 years old, on the forehead one last time. The Kerchers would have to leave Perugia and go back home to England without Meredith. Due to the investigation, it would be another 4 weeks before they would be able to bring Meredith's body back home in order to properly lay her to rest. Even then, once back home in England, Meredith's body had to be held at the funeral home for an additional 2 weeks, as defense counsel discussed the possibility of having Meredith's body returned back to Italy once again for further autopsy. No such further autopsy would be ordered. On December 14, 2007, Meredith's funeral would be held at the church associated with her old high school, the Old Palace School, with more than 500 people in attendance. Just 2 weeks away from Christmas and what would have been her 22nd birthday, Meredith would be laid to rest at the Mitcham Road Cemetery. The break-in. I saved this part for the last of this video. Almost immediately, investigators deduced that the break-in in Philomena's room was staged. Postal Police Officer Bassatelli had taken one look at the room and said, "I don't think this is a robbery. It looks more like a put-up job to me." Other officers who later arrived on scene joked that only Spider-Man could have entered through that window. Now, while this may seem like a rush to judgment, there really wasn't much evidence to point to someone climbing through that window. Philomena's window overlooked a drop-off on the side of the cottage. It was over 12 feet off the ground. The ground under the window did not show any signs of being disturbed, and there wasn't any fingerprints, shoe prints, or dirt on the side of the home indicating that someone had scaled the side of it recently. There was a rusted nail that stuck out from under the window that some suppose the intruder could have used to get footing on the side of the home, but the nail wasn't bent. So you would assume that if someone grabbed onto this rusted nail or stood on it to try to support themselves to get into this window, this rusted nail's gonna bend. Philomena said that her room was clean and the shutters were closed the last time she had been in her room the day before. The glass from the broken window was laying on top of the clothing and various items thrown around the room, meaning someone had ransacked her room before breaking the window. A large rock weighing over 8 pounds sat on the floor. No damage was done to the shutters, and since the shutters had been closed, the intruder would first have to climb up to open the shutters before they could break the window. No damage was done to the frame, and only the lower half of the left window glass panel was broken. So the intruder would have either had to be carrying this huge rock with him when he scaled the wall to open the shutters, or after he opened the shutters, he climbed back down and then threw this heavy rock into a window over 12 feet off the ground. But only the lower half of the left window was broken. No damage was done to the shutters or the frame. So the intruder would have had to have perfect aim and strength to throw a rock that high up and only hit the one area of glass. It seems more likely that the rock hit the window closer up. While the left glass panel was broken, it was too small of a hole for anyone to climb through, and they would risk severely cutting themselves on the glass as well. The latch to open the window was located on the inside of the right window panel, the side that wasn't broken. So the intruder, while perched on the side of the home, would have to reach his arm up and through the broken half of the left window to reach the latch on the right side. Now, keep in mind there would have been sharp, broken glass everywhere on this window ledge, so it would have been almost impossible not to cut yourself. But no blood was found anywhere on the window. Defense's theory was that Rudy gained access to Pergola 7 by breaking and entering through this window on the evening of November 1st while no one was home. While Rudy's fingerprints, shoe prints, and DNA were found throughout the other areas of the apartment, mostly in Meredith's room and the larger bathroom, none were found in Philomena's room. His fingerprints were found nowhere on the window, the shutters, or the outside of the home. Philomena's window was also in full view of many apartments that overlooked Pergola 7. Anyone going down the street or anyone walking to the parking garage across the way would be able to see them. Now, not as many people were out because it was All Saints' Day, but I have watched a lot of the CCTV footage from the parking garage across the street, and there was still a steady flow of people and cars going past the home that night. And he would have had to have broken into the home before 9 p.m. It would have taken time to scale the wall, open the shutters, break the window, open the latch, and climb through. Someone definitely would have seen him doing it. Rudy had broken into at least two buildings, a Milan daycare and a Parisian law office. Rudy had entered the daycare through the front door that had been damaged from a different break-in a few days prior. In order to get into the law office, Rudy had climbed onto a terrace and entered through a French window. Rudy was very familiar with Pergola 7. He had visited the guys in the downstairs apartment on multiple occasions. So Rudy would have known that there was also a similar terrace located at the rear of the cottage. It was right over the entrance to the guy's lower level apartment. It would have been much easier for Rudy to climb to the terrace and break into the upstairs apartment from there. He also wouldn't be in full view of anyone passing by if he broke in this way. The apartment would also get broken into twice during Amanda and Raffaele's trial in 2009, on February 21st and on March 19th. Both times the intruders had entered in through the back window in the kitchen or living area. Now, defense still tried to prove the plausibility of this window being how Rudy entered the apartments. On August 27th, 2008, Sollecito's defense team would try to prove the plausibility of Rudy entering through Philomena's window. They would enlist another lawyer who was over 6 feet tall. Now, Rudy's only 5'11". The lawyer was able to climb up the side of the home, but was unable to pull himself into the window, and he just hung there. Years later, the defense would hire a climbing enthusiast to demonstrate how someone would be able to climb through Philomena's room. While Rudy had broken into two other buildings, I don't know if I would call him a climbing enthusiast. And when this demonstration was done, there had been bars added to the window on the side of the home that hadn't been there back in 2007. The climbing enthusiast used the bars on the windows in order to pull himself up to Philomena's window. Also, both of these demonstrations didn't take into account how Rudy would have then broken the window with a large, heavy rock. While in prison awaiting trial, a call between Amanda, her mom, and her dad would be recorded. Amanda would state that Rudy was friends with the downstairs neighbors, and instead of him breaking in, maybe he had just knocked on the door and said that he was waiting for Giacomo and Meredith let him in. But that wouldn't make sense either. Giacomo was back home for the holiday weekend. All of the downstairs neighbors were. A fact Meredith was sure to know given the fact that Giacomo had asked her to water their pot plants while they were gone. And if Rudy was able to gain entry into the apartment without breaking in, why would he then go on to stage a break-in? He benefits nothing from staging a break-in, and in fact, it just points more suspicion in his direction. He had been careless enough to leave his fingerprints, shoe prints, and DNA in the larger bathroom, Meredith's room, and in other areas of the apartment, but somehow left none in Philomena's room. But luminol did reveal two wiped up stains in Philomena's room, one containing Meredith's DNA, and the other containing mostly Meredith's with a small amount of Amanda's mixed in. Those who believe that Amanda is completely innocent and had no involvement in this crime will be very hard-pressed to admit that the break-in is staged. Because while it doesn't put the knife directly in Amanda's hand that night, it is very damning circumstantial evidence against her. Because staging a break-in means that Amanda felt worried enough about her level of involvement in the crime that she wanted to make sure that the crime scene pointed as far away from her as possible, and that this looked like it was committed by a lone intruder. It would also be posed that maybe the break-in wasn't the only thing that was staged in the apartment. Rudy's DNA, though not his sperm, would be found in Meredith. In closing arguments, co-prosecutor Manuela Camodi theorized Raffaele and Amanda wanted to make sure it looked like an obvious sexual assault committed by a lone intruder. They staged the break-in in Philomena's room, moved Meredith away from the closet, placing a pillow under her lower back, removing her jacket, lifting up her shirts, then cutting off her bra. Meredith's bra had been cut off of her from behind. The severed clasp was originally found under the pillow, under Meredith's lower back. Raffaele's DNA would later be found on the clasp, specifically on the hooks, meaning he was the one who most likely cut Meredith's bra off of her after her murder. Given that Meredith was covered by a blanket, they felt only a female could do that. They believed Amanda placed the comforter over Meredith in order to give her some dignity, despite the total disregard she's had for her former friend and roommate so far. Amanda and Raffaele also wanted to make it look like a robbery, so they placed the open purse on the bed, tossing crumpled receipts on top of the comforter, concealing Meredith. A lot of people who support Amanda's innocence believe that she was railroaded and that investigators had tunnel vision from the start. And yes, I do admit, police immediately did look at Amanda. It would have been negligent for them not to. I hate to break it to you, but if you discover a crime scene, police are going to have to rule you out. Also, if you were close to the victim, police are also going to have to look at you as well. Also, if other people are coming to the police and telling them that you had tensions or conflict with the victim prior to their death, they're also going to want to look at you too. Amanda checks off all three of these boxes. So yes, police did immediately need to look at Amanda. But the more and more that they looked at her, they couldn't rule her out. Her story didn't add up, it didn't make sense, and it would keep changing. Okay, I think this is where I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up today, and I'll pick up our story right where I left off in our next video. I think with this series, I will have 2 more videos, and right now I'm thinking I will be able to upload 1 video every other week. Once I finish up this series, I will switch to a case that doesn't take as long to do all of the writing and editing for. So if you would like to stay tuned for any upcoming videos that I post, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and stay safe out there. Bye for now.